Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Nun Aleph. Davar halamed bebinyan av mahu sheyilamed be'kesh ubegezerah shava ubekal vachomer ubebinyan av. So continuing our investigation of various ways of deriving a law through a double derivation. So we have a few more instances to try to clarify. And the question is, if you learn something from a binyan av, from A to B, then can you take that, whatever you learned from issue B, and then derive another law to area C from using a hekesh? So in other words, binyan av followed by hekesh. Or what about binyan av followed by gezerah shava? Or binyan av followed by kal vachomer? Or binyan av followed by binyan av? That's the question. Peshot miha hada. We're going to leave three of them unanswered. We don't have information. But the last one, binyan av, together with the binyan av. That, it seems, yes, you can do that. Mipnei ma ameru. Lan bedam kasher, shareh lan be'emurin kasher. Lan be'emurin kasher, shareh lan be'basar kasher. There's a braita that says, how do you know that if you have lan bedam, blood that was left over to the next day, blood of a korban animal, you have to use it that very same day. You take it, you take it in a kli, you walk it, sprinkle it, pour the rest on the base. Whatever you're going to do with it has to be done that same day. You're not allowed to leave over afterwards. You can't put it on the mizbeach if it's left over. That's lechatechila. One may not put it on the mizbeach on the next day. However, what if you did b'di'avad? So, kasher, you can leave it on the mizbeach. The mizbeach, if there are certain things that you shouldn't put on the mizbeach, but the mizbeach will make them kadosh. If they're at some level, in some way kadosh, in some area, then you can leave it on and let it continue to stay on the mizbeach. But there are some things that are so pasul that even if you put it on, you have to take it off. And this braita is going to list a whole bunch of things that, although you're not supposed to put them on the mizbeach in the first place, once they're there, you can leave it there. And so the first thing is dam, that you left over. Why? Because we're going to compare blood that is left over to the next day with emurin, the sacrificial inner parts of the korban that are supposed to be put on the mizbeach. They also should be put on the same day of that day and that night. Now, what if you left it over to the next day? Well, that's prohibited. You should not put it on. But if you do, it's okay. So we make a binyan av, just like the emurin that you put on the mizbeach, you can leave there. So to the dam that you put on the mizbeach, you can leave there. But that itself, how do you know that emurin are kasher if you leave it there? Lan be'emurin kasher, shareh lan be'basar kasher. Because if you have a zevach shelamim offering, you can eat it that day, that night, and even the next day. You have 2 nights, 2 days, and 1 night. So since the leftover of basar, of the meat of a shelamim offering is kasher, so therefore we make a binyan av, just like the meat that you would eat is kosher the next day, so too the innards that you burn the next day, you can leave it up there, and therefore another binyan av, the blood that you leave up there, that the blood that you leave over to the next day, but then you put it on the mizbeach the next day, you shouldn't do that. But if you did, b'di'avad, it's okay. I was going to ask about this, that, after all, the basar is kasher. You're learning something that is actually kosher. The Torah says you're allowed to leave it over. So that, how could you compare that to a case where you're not allowed to leave it over? Just because one thing is kosher, how does that mean that the other thing is not kosher? Okay, the Gemara will talk about that in a second. But the point is here, we do have an example of a binyan av built upon another binyan av. So therefore, yes, it seems that you can learn it. Now the braita is going to continue for a while and give other examples. Yoseh kasher bebama. If you took part of an offering and you brought it outside of the temple courtyard, you're not allowed to do that. And if that part is supposed to be put on the mizbeach, since you took it out of the courtyard, now it's no good, and you cannot put it on the mizbeach. But if you did put it on the mizbeach, you leave it there. Why? Because there is an example of yotzeh that is kosher, and that is when the time of bamot, when you are allowed to make private altars outside of the mishkan. At that time, the law of Yotzeh did not apply to them because there's no walls if there's just an altar in someone's backyard. And therefore, since Yotzeh is permitted in that case, so since there is some case in which Yotzeh is permitted, therefore, if even in the Bet HaMikdash something is Yotzeh, don't put it on the Mizbeach, but if you did b'diavad, you can leave it there because there is some aspect of it that could be kosher in some scenario. Tameh, ho'il ve'utar ba'avodah sibur. That if you have korban meat that became tameh, and you put it on the Mizbeach, again, you're not supposed to put it on the Mizbeach if it's tameh. But if you did, you leave it there. Why? Because there is a scenario where you could do it lechatechila. And that's if it's avodat tzibur, if it's communal offering. And most of the community is tameh, then you're allowed to make that korban, even bitumah, and put it on the Mizbeach, even though it's tameh. So since there is a scenario where the Mizbeach will accept tameh food, therefore, it's permitted to leave it there b'diavad. If you had a sacrificial meat where the one who slaughtered it or did one of the activities had intent that it would be consumed after its time, that's pigul. Now pigul, it's disqualified. It's invalid. You should not put it on the mizbech. If you did, you can leave it there. Why? Because remember, the law of pigul is that in order for something to become pigul and chayav karet, you have to do everything else correctly. All the other steps, everything has to be done properly, except for the intention of pigul. So since it's meratzeh, it's a funny word, meratzeh, it's acceptable to make it pigul. It has to be acceptable in all other ways, so it is in some sense acceptable, because everything was done properly in order to make it pigul. So that is a kind of acceptability, and that by itself makes it permitted to leave on the mizbeach b'di'avad. If one had intent that it would be consumed outside of the area, that also makes it pasul. But if you put it on the mizbech b'di'avad, you can leave it there. Why? Because we compare chutz l'mkomo to chutz l'zmano. So since those are comparable, and we just said chutz l'zmano, you can leave it up there. So to chutz l'mkomo. Shekibelu pesulin v'zarku daman behanach pesulin dechazu la'avodat tzibur. If someone who is pasul, a kohen who's pasul, receives the blood or sprinkles the blood, not supposed to do that if he's pasul. But if someone pasul did that, and then you put the korban on the mizbeach, you leave it up there. What is that talking about? It's only talking about someone who's pasul, who can do a korban in some area, which is a kohen who is tameh. If a kohen is tameh and all the kohanim are tameim, then they can still perform a korban sibur. So since there is a scenario in which that could be kosher, therefore this sacrifice, even though it's only one kohen who is tameh, and therefore really is pasul and should not be up there, but b'diavad, since there is a scenario where tameh kohanim, there would be valid, therefore this is going to be acceptable to leave on the mizbeach b'diavad. That's the end of the baraita. So we proved that yes, in the first example you have binyan av, built upon it binyan av. But now we question that. How does this baraita even work? Can you learn something that is not fit because it has a time limit, has to be put on the mizbeach that day and that night? Can you derive a law to something that is fit, is kosher, a korban shelamim, which lechatechila, you can eat it even the next day. So how can you say, oh, binyan av, this thing you could do the next day? Therefore, that's going to give permission to the blood that has to be that only one day. Oh, permission, even if it's lan, you can do it the next day too. How could you compare those two things? Or sacrificial meat, the sacrificial innards that have to be that day, has to be only that day. So how can you compare that and learn, it's the next day, but the avad it's okay, since shalamim. But shalamim is lechatechila, okay. And the answer is Tana mizot Torah ta'olah riba samichle. This Tana, he was assuming that you already know this pasuk, zot Torah ta'olah. This is the law for the olah, and this comes to include. It's inclusive law. There should be one law for the olah. The continuation of the pasuk is about the fire, which goes, and it is that which goes up on its firewood upon the altar all night until morning. A fire shall thereby be kept burning. So it's talking about everything that is burnt on the fire. It even makes reference to about until the morning. And so this is riba. So it comes to include Zot Torah ta'olah. Torah, this is going to be one law. You can put all these things on the Mizbeach. Now it's not including everything. It's only including certain things that if you put on them already, if you put it on B'diavad, you can leave it there because there's some aspect and some scenario in which is permitted. So this pasuk already tells us that we should be including things. Now, once we already know from this pasuk that we have to include some things that you're allowed to leave on the mizbeach, then we just are looking for examples. So we have a samich. We're just relying on that to say, okay, which things is it more likely to put on? Well, it makes sense if something that is left over, since we do have an example of shilamim that you can leave over. So then, even things that actually you shouldn't leave over, if you put them on, it's okay. It must be that those are the things that this pasuk is coming to include. And therefore, it seems that based on this, you can't really learn a binyan av based on another binyan av. Here, we're actually learning the halacha from this ribui in Zot Torah ta'olah, and then the comparisons are just to try to figure out this seems to be more in and this seems to be out, because we know some things are in and some things are out. So it's just helping us define what the law is, but the fundamental law is actually learned from a ribui in the pasuk. Sheyareh hadam v'chuleh. Back to the Mishnah, which teaches that the leftover of the blood of the korbanot, kodesh kodashim, that are sprinkled inside the kodesh, after you do the sprinkling, then you bring that blood to the outside mizbeach and pour it on the western side of the mizbeach on the base. My ta'ama, what's the source? Amar kira el yesod mizbach ha'olah asher petach ohen moed hahu depaga beresha. Because the pasuk says regarding the pad hatat of Kohen Gadol, which is sprinkled on the inside mizbeach, then you take it and you pour it on the outside mizbach ha'olah, which is in front of Ohen Moed. Now we know where the mizbach ha'olah is. We know that it's out in front of Ohen Moed. So why do you have to say that? It means that as soon as you encounter it, whichever side of it you encounter first, that's where you should put it. And the western side of the Mizbeach is the side that's facing the Kodesh, and so therefore it should be poured on the base on the western side. Now we learn a baraita about the base and pouring the blood on the base of the Mizbeach. Tenorabanan el yesod mizbach ha'olah. In chapter 4 of Vayikra, it says the word el yesod mizbach ha'olah 3 times. The first one is regarding the pod of the Kohen Gadol who sins. The leftover, as we just said, is poured on the base of Mizbach HaOlah. Velo yesod Mizbeach HaPenimi. And that's to teach me that you do not pour it on the base of the inside Mizbach HaKetoret. And then again, it says the same phrase regarding the pad helim davar shel sibur el yesod mizbach haolah. What is that needed for? En lo yesod penimi asmo. It's to teach me that you don't even build a base for the inner mizbech. It doesn't even have a base. It just goes straight down to the floor. There's no baseboard. El yesod mizbach ha'olah. Then it says the same phrase again when it comes to the sin offering for a king. And so why do we need that one? And the answer is 10. Yesod lamizbeach shel olah. That one should place a base to the outside mizbeach. This seems to teach not just that you should build a base there, but that the remainder of the blood has to be poured onto the base. You can't just pour it anywhere on the mizbeach, but rather pour it on the mizbech ha'olah. O eno ela mizbecha shel olah yehe lisod. And now we question, how do you know that this pasuk is coming to teach me that you have to pour the remainder of the blood onto the base of the mizbech ha'olah? Maybe what's actually teaching is the mizbeach for the korban olah, when it comes to the sprinkling of its blood up on top, should be in a place where there is a base underneath. In other words, this is not talking about the pouring of the remainder of the blood, but rather you have a korban olah. You have to sprinkle the korban olah. It has to be on two corners. Now, can it be any two corners? No, to teach me that it has to be on two corners, where below those corners there is a base. Now, around the Mizbeach happens to be that in the southeast corner there is no base. So that would mean that you cannot sprinkle on the southeast corner, and said you'd have to do the other two corners adjacent to it. Maybe that's what it's coming to teach me. Amar Rabbi Ishmael, kal vachomer ma shirayim she'en mechaperin te'onin yesod, techilat olah shemechaperet en odin she'te'ona yesod. And Rabbi Ishmael says, no, I can learn this law from a kal vachomer, just as the remainder of the blood, which do not effectuate atonement. If you didn't do it, they would still get atoned. It's only the sprinkling that you need for atonement. So the shirayim, which is less important, yet you have to pour it on the base. Therefore, the techilat olah, the beginning, the first sprinklings of the korban olah, which are necessary for atonement, all the more so, it would have to be where there is a base. And so I could figure that based on a kal vachomer, and therefore, this pasuk is free to teach me the more basic law that the shirayim, the remainder of the blood, has to be put on the mizbeach. That will be a basis. Has to be put on the base. So this is the more fundamental law, and then I can build a kal vachomer for the first sprinklings, that they also have to be where there is a base. Amar Rabbi Akiva. This was from Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva has a similar derivation of the same law. Ma shirayim she'en mechaperin ve'en ba'in lechapara te'ona yesod. If we say regarding the leftover, which do not effectuate atonement and do not even come to effectuate atonement, that's not their purpose. It's just the leftover. So you should do that. You should pour it on the base, and that has to be placed on the base of the mizbeach. Techilat olah shemechaperet uba'a lechapara en odin shete'ona yesod. So then the first sprinklings of the blood, which effectuate atonement, and that's their purpose, to come for atonement. So just adding another description here. All the more so, it should be placed on the mizbeach, up on the horns, where in a spot that is above where the mizbeach has a base. Okay, so therefore we already know that, so we can figure that out based on a kal vachomer. So now we've defended this derasha. Now we continue. Im ken, ma tamod omar el yesod mizbach ha'olah, ten yesod mizbecha shel olah. Since we concluded that you can figure out this law from a kal vachomer, therefore we can go back and, as we said before, what did we learn from el yesod mizbach ha'olah? It means that you have to pour the shirayim on the base of the korban, on the base of the mizbeach. That's the end of the baraita. Now we go back and analyze the section. Amar mor el yesod mizbach velo yesod mizbeach hapenimi. So now we go back to the beginning of the baraita that said, from the first example of par kohen gadol, where it says el yesod mizbeach, we can learn from there that regarding all korbanot, you never pour it on the shirayim on mizbach hapenimi. So this is a derasha that we're going to expand for. That is true all the time. Now we ask, Kami ba'ile legufeh, don't we need this to teach me about the pot of the Kohen Gadol itself? The pot of the Kohen Gadol is the sprinkling happens inside. So actually you might think over there that it might be also you pour it, the leftovers, on the inside mizbeach. So we need this law just for this. How can you use it as a derasha for everything else? And the answer is me'asher petach ol moed nafka. No, we can learn the law of this particular, that par kohen gadol has to be poured out on the outside mizbeach from the rest of the pasuk that says, which is in the entrance of Ohel Moed. So since that is clearly talking about the outside mizbeach, we already know that for this pod, Kohen Gadol, you're going to have to pour it on the outside Mizbeach. Therefore, what does this extra word come to teach? El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah. Oh, must be this comes to teach me regarding all other korbanot. So we save that derasha. And now we come to the third of one in the baraita. El Yesod Mizbach HaOlah, from the sin offering of a king. Now a king's sa'ir, hatat, that is sprinkled on the outside mizbeach, and it's poured on the outside Mizbeach. Now, the Baraita says we learn from here, Ten Yesod Mizbeach Shel Olah, that you have to put a base around the Mizbach Olah, and you have to pour the leftover on that base. Now, if you would say, this is just as written, meaning this is a law, this law applies for the king itself. I'm not going to use it to derive other general laws about korbanot, that it's always, the pouring always has to be on the outside mizbeach for the shirayim. Maybe this is teaching me just for this, the law of the king. If you would say that, Hana lamali kera the shirayim ha barai abid lehu. Well, if so, if you think that that's what it's talking about, then why would I need a pasuk? This is talking about the leftovers. The leftovers, where do you think it's going to be? This whole korban is only sprinkled on the outside. Even the initial sprinklings of the blood are done on the outside mizbeach. So for sure, you're going to pour the leftover blood on the outside mizbeach, and therefore I don't need this the pasuk for its own context, and therefore it's extra, and I can use it to teach me all other contexts, which is important because that means even sprinklings that are done on the inside for other korbanot, inner korbanot, those also I have to learn that not only that you don't put it on the inside, but that you do put it on the outside mizbeach and it's on the base. Now you might think, actually, even though this is sprinkled outside, maybe it would be poured, the leftover would be poured on the inside mizbeach. And this is the way korbanot work, that you always reverse them. And that which is sprinkled outside, you pour the leftovers inside. And that which is sprinkled inside, you pour the leftovers outside. The second thing is actually true. Any korban, where you sprinkle the blood inside, like the pod of the Kohen Gadol, and the pod and sayid of Yom Kippur, which the sprinkling is done inside, then you pour the leftovers outside. So maybe that's the model, and then if it's sprinkled outside, then you should pour it inside. But that would be impossible because there is no base to the mizbeach that's inside, and since there has no base, there's nowhere to pour it. So that argument, the hava amina itself, has no basis, and since that's impossible, I wouldn't think that, and therefore this pasuk is extra to teach me a law, a general law about all korbanot. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.